All right, it is 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and we are ready to get started. So hello and welcome to the Anywhere Demo and Q&A webcast for Wednesday, November 28th, 2018. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present today Selwyn Rabins, our president and co-founder, who's going to be covering the latest features of Alpha Anywhere, features that have come out within the last week or so, and there's an awful lot of them, so I can't wait to get started. So let's begin. Selwyn, I'm going to first take you off mute here. Hello, Selwyn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter, and in a minute you should see a dialog box, and it should ask you to share your screen. And there's your screen. I can see your PowerPoint.
Okay, great. So you can see the PowerPoint, is that correct?
I sure can, yes.
Okay, great. So are we ready to go, Dave?
We're ready to go.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Dave. So welcome, everybody, and I'm very happy to be here today talking about what's new in the November release of Alpha Anywhere. There's quite a lot in it, and if you look at the release notes, you'll see that they document quite a large number of new features. And so what I've done for today is I've just chosen a select subset of the features that I can show in a quick 1-hour webinar. And what I want to do first is, before we actually dive into the demo, sort of just go through what it is that I'm going to be showing, and then we'll move over into the demo. So the first thing is that there have been a lot of new additions to the list control. So there's a new list control type called Kanban, and Kanban is just a sort of a fancy name for a particular type of list that has become very popular, which is a list control that basically displays data that belongs in one of several different categories. So, for example, a to-do list might have categories of not yet started, in progress, and completed. And then you can easily drag items from one category into another category, or reorder the items within a category. So there are a lot of use cases for Kanban lists. To-do lists obviously are one type of use case. Sales pipelines are another type of use case. So basically, we'll show how you can create Kanban layouts in a list control very easily. Then we've got responsive columns. So that's basically list controls that change the number of columns that are displayed based on the type of device that you're on. So if you're on a full desktop browser, you might show all of the columns in a list, and then as you move down to, say, a phone, which has just got a very narrow screen width, you might only show 1 or 2 columns in the list. We're going to talk about client-side group breaks. We've always had client-side group breaks in the list, but now you can collapse and expand the client-side group breaks. There's a new control now called Advanced Search, and this control is actually available in both the list and also the grid component. And it allows you to expose to the user some very powerful new options for searching SQL-bound list controls and also grid controls. There's a new navigation control in the list that makes it very easy to create navigation bars for list controls that are similar to the navigation bars that we have in the grid. And this applies to list controls that are paginated and that are based on SQL data. And then there's a new client-side styling option for list data. Basically, we've also made enhancements to the Alpha style, which is sort of the newest style in Alpha. We've added something called the pulse effect, and that has been inspired by Google Material Design, which has become quite popular. And you'll see that the pulse effect gives some very nice visual effects to the style when you tap on buttons or things like that. And then there are about, I think, 10 or more new styles that you can choose from. these styles are all inherited from Alpha. So the ability to inherit styles is new in this version. And what we mean by inherit styles is that if you were to basically, use one of these inherited styles, then when Alpha makes enhancements to the base Alpha theme, those enhancements are automatically seen in any of the inherited styles. So basically it means that at Alpha we just need to maintain one style sheet, which is Alpha, and then all the inherited styles automatically get updated when the base style updates. In the UX and also in the grid, there are new genies for helping you build specialized kinds of messages. So we'll talk about drop-down messages, which can include confirmation messages and wait messages. We'll also talk about transient messages, which is a message style that you'll see a lot in Google applications. So if you've been using, say, the Google Gmail client, you'll notice that whenever you send an email or delete a message, there's a temporary transient message that pops up. And so in Alpha, you can now create those transient messages very easily in both the grid and also the UX. And then there's action sheets, which is also a very popular pattern that you see in mobile applications for creating pop-up dialogues that have a whole bunch of menu options on them. There's a new sample UX component called an Ad-hoc SQL query builder. And this allows you to, when you're building applications, expose to your customers the ability to create ad hoc SQL queries to examine data in a backend database. And this functionality has been supplied in the form of a sample UX component so that you can modify the component yourself when you add it into your own projects. And we're going to talk about custom AlphaDAO drivers. So currently, you know that you can build drivers that go against SQL databases or OData data sources, against Salesforce data, etc. But now with custom drivers, you can actually build your own drivers against any backend data source. So you can make any REST service or sub-service look like a SQL database so that you can then go ahead and build grid, UX components, etc., against that data source. And as we talk about custom data sources, there are two examples of custom data sources that we'll demonstrate. In particular, there's a data source, a custom data source called a multi-tenant data source that we're going to be talking about, and then also an audit trail data source. So the multi-tenant database is intended to make it easy to build multi-tenant applications. So we'll talk about that. Next, we'll talk about the new XBasic REST API proxy. So calling REST APIs has become very important in building web applications. And in many cases, those REST APIs are going to be called from the server side. And now with the REST API proxy, it makes it very easy to call REST services from XBasic by creating an XBasic proxy that has a bunch of methods on it that lets you call into the API methods. So the REST API proxy is very useful for exposing REST services to XBasic. Within the security framework itself, we now have something called the expanded user info table. So as some of you might know from the past, we used to support something called a UU link field in the security framework that allowed you to put additional information about each user in your security system in an additional table. But we ended support for that in large part because under IIS, there is no concept of a UU link field. But now what we have with the security framework is a optional additional table that you can create, and you can specify exactly what fields are in this expanded info table. And then for each user in your security system, you can store additional information like the user's first name or last name, maybe their language preference if you've got an app that runs in multiple language areas, maybe an avatar for the user, etc. So you can put any information that you want in the expanded user information table. And another thing that's nice about this whole expanded user information is that when a user logs in, you can automatically populate arguments with data from the expanded user information table. So that sort of is a quick outline of what we're going to cover in the webinar today. And with that, let's move on into the actual demo. So what you should see over here is my project that we have. And let's start out now with Kanban lists. So I'm going to go here and create a brand new Kanban list. So I'll go here and start out with a new UX component. And then I'm going to go over to controls and choose a list control. And now I'm going to go and choose the data source for this list. And I'll start out keeping it very simple. I'll just go here and choose a static data source. And one of the sample data sources that we have here is a sales pipeline for a Kanban list. So I'm going to go ahead there and choose that. And you can see here that in this sample data, one of the categories, one of the columns in the data is category. So this is the category that each row falls into. So basically this first row is a prospect. And then when we move down here, we can see these rows over here are closed. So in other words, the user has actually closed the sale on that item. So we'll start out over there. Then we'll go over to the layout, and we'll specify that this layout is not a column layout, which is the default layout, which is just columns of data. And it's also not a free-form layout. So previously, the only two layout types were column and free-form, but now I'm going to choose the Kanban style. So you can also basically have a list control that has multiple layouts. So that means that you could have a columnar layout and also a Kanban layout, so that at runtime, the user can easily switch from one layout type to another. So now I'll bring up the Genie to build the Kanban list. So our category field is going to be called category, and then our order field is going to be called basically item order. So the item order is the order in which the fields within a particular category are displayed. So for example, within, say, the sales prospect category, you might want to specifically order the rows of data within that category. So then I've got some additional options. So for example, by default, if a category has no items in it, the category is not shown. But you might want to show the category even if there are no records in it. So for example, initially, the Kanban list might have no records in the closed category, but you might want the closed category to always show. So we can basically define some default category names. And you can see here that you can actually get the category names by introspecting into the data. So here are all of the categories that are currently being used in the data that we've specified. So we want the closed category to be last. So I'm going to go move that to the end. And we want the prospect category to be first. So I'm just going to go and reorder these items over here. And then we can basically also specify a color function, so we'll come back to that. And we can specify whether the categories themselves can be collapsed. So I'm going to go ahead there and click OK. And now I need to define the actual layout of my Kanban list. So I can choose one of the predefined templates. So I'll go ahead here and choose this template. So here's my template. This is where I'm going to actually place the placeholders for the data in my list. And this here is the drag handle that I can drag on to move a row from one list item, from one category to another category. So I'll just go to placeholders here and I'll put in, say, company and amount. I'll just stick in a little space over there. Click OK. And then let's just change this to be the full width of the screen. And I'll just save this as UX1. Go ahead now and run it. And also I'm going to go here and choose a style sheet. So let's go here and choose, say, the alpha style. And we'll go ahead now and we'll run it. And so now what we see is we see the Kanban list. So here are our categories: prospect, proposal, qualified, and closed. I can take an item and change its position. I can take an item and move it to a different category. For example, over there, I can move it into a different category, and etc. So basically, you can see that it's very easy to build a Kanban list. But at this point, I'm working with static data. So any of the changes that are made, that I'm making in the order or category of a list, essentially get lost. So in a real world application, you typically would base your data on a SQL data source, and then when you move the records around, what you want to do is persist the edits back into a database. So let's go now to a Kanban example that I've previously built. So you can see here we have a Kanban list that is now based on a SQL backend, and you can see here that it's based on SQL. And the way in which I got this SQL database was I started out with static data using the sample data that came from the when I go here to static data and choose sample data. And then I went to this option over here, which has been in Alpha for quite some time now, to take the static data and push it into a back-end SQL database automatically. So I was able to create this table over here with all of the data automatically by just pushing it into the back-end database. So I'm going to go now and actually bring up that database so we can take a look inside it. So we'll go over there to tables and then go to Kanban data. So here's the data that we're showing in the back-end list. So you can see here for each row, here's the category, and here's the item order within that category. So as we move data around in the Kanban list, we expect to see now the data in the SQL backend database getting updated. So let's go back and take a look at our list over here. So we've got a standard Kanban list over here, just like we previously set up. But in order to persist the data back into a backend database, what we've done is we've turned on the detail view. So you can see here we've turned on the detail view for this list control, but we haven't actually defined a detail view per se. So there's no need to actually go ahead and define a detail view. And we can see now that, and then we've also basically got a button over here which does save edit. So this is basically the same button that you would use in a normal list with the detail view, which you can add by going over here to list detail view buttons and choosing this synchronize option over here. So this button, Save Edits, is actually doing a list synchronization, which means that the edits that I do to the Kanban list could be made while I was offline, and then I could persist them only when I went online. So let's go ahead now and run this now. So you can see here's all my data. And one of the things you'll notice is that each item in the Kanban list has a color code, which is defined through some JavaScript, which we'll take a look at. So now if I go here, for example, and move this item over there, we can see now that this row and this row are dirty. So the reason that both rows are dirty is that I've updated the order of this item and of this item. So now if I go ahead now and say Save Edit, so we can see that currently Rattlesnake Canyon, let's go take a look at Rattlesnake Canyon over here. So Rattlesnake Canyon right now is item order number 6. So I'm going to go there and hit the synchronize button. So now we've synchronized. And if we go here and look at Rattlesnake Canyon after we do a refresh, we can see now it's changed to 5. So I'm going to go here now and say move north. Let's go move the big cheese into the closed category. So now that becomes dirty, and then we're going to go ahead and save it. And so now the big cheese basically is in a different category called closed. We can also dynamically add new categories. So I'll just go here and type in, say, new, and then click this button. And now we've added a new category to the Kanban list, and we can move our item into that category, and then we can go ahead and synchronize our edits. So the way in which we created these colors over here is, you can see if we go back into the list control here and go to Kanban properties, we can see that one of the options in the Genie is the so-called color JavaScript. And this is a JavaScript script that basically sets the color of the color coding bar in the layout. So you can see how we said that if data.category is proposal, we want that to be green, etc. So this is our JavaScript that defines the color. And then you can see that in the actual layout itself, over here, we've got a div that has a width of 10 pixels that's on the left-hand side of each row. And we've said that the background color is going to be returned by this JavaScript function. And this JavaScript function is the code that I just specified in the builder. So this is going to determine if this color swatch on the left is going to be either red or green or blue, etc. So what we've shown over here now is how the data in the Kanban list can be persisted to a backend SQL database, so that when you move an item from one category to another category, the SQL database automatically updates, as long as you've basically set the Kanban list to be based on SQL and you've created a detailed view. So let's move on now from Kanban lists into responsive columns. So I'm going to bring up a sample that we've created over here.
Before we move on, can we just ask a quick question about Kanban lists, and that is, how do you delete an item from a Kanban list?
Basically, so you delete an item in exactly the same way that you would delete any row in a list control. So the Kanban list is just a list control. That means that all of the methods that you currently have for deleting a row in the list control would apply. So in the case of a data-bound list control, there are methods that that are documented that allow you to remove items from a list control. So basically, the Kanban list really is, it's just a list control. All of the methods that a list control have apply. So in effect, the Kanban list is just nothing more than a different way of viewing the data in a list control. And essentially, it's a variant of a list control with client-side grouping turned on.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's look now at responsive columns. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to open up the sample here, and I'm going to run it, and then explain how we did that. So you can see now we have a list control at the full width here, which is 1,000 pixels, and we're seeing all of the columns in the list. So now, as I basically take the slider and start making the list narrower, you can see that as the list gets narrower, certain columns are going to disappear from the list. So you can see now we're down to 3 columns, and when we get to the very end here, we're down to just a single column. So basically, as the list gets wider, basically columns come back in, etc. So this responsive column layout is actually really easy to do. You just simply go into the list control, you go to the layout, and then for each column, you can specify basically the minimum size that the list must have in order for that column to be visible. So what we're saying over here is that this company name column is going to be visible as long as the list is more than 800 pixels wide. And then contact name will be there only if the list is more than 700 pixels wide. So when the list falls below 700 pixels, contact name will disappear from the list control. So then in order to actually demonstrate that, we've added a slider control over here that basically goes from 200 pixels to 1,000 pixels. And in the on-change event of the slider control, we're going to get a pointer to this container over here. We're going to set the width of that container, and then we're going to go ahead and resize and refresh the list control. So the list control basically has been set to fill the container over there. So that means that as we resize the container, when we resize the list will basically take on the size of the container. So you can see here now, if we go and run it again, that the container is now 1,000 pixels wide. If I move it over there, the container is now 863 pixels, and some of the columns in the list have disappeared. So next we'll talk about client-side group breaks. So client-side group breaks have always been available in the list control, but previously there's not been a method to either collapse or expand the client-side group breaks. So let's go now to client-side group breaks over here. And I have a list control over here that is based on some static data. It uses data from the Northwind customer table. And I'm going to go ahead now and run the list control. And we can see now that you can see here's my groups. I'm grouping by country and within country by city. And currently all of the groups are expanded. So I'm going to go here and click this button to collapse all. So now you can see that all of the groups have been collapsed. And if I go and expand Argentina, then I can go and expand Buenos Aires. And basically the list shows the data. It uses animation as the rows, as the groups are expanded, etc. And you can see here that basically I can collapse and expand by just actually tapping anywhere within the group header. So the way that this collapsible groups are done is you just go straight into the list control. You go over to list properties. You'll see that we have here client-side group breaks. And then within the group break definition, there's a new option called can collapse group. So you can see we're allowing both the top level group, which is country, and the second level group, which is city, to be collapsible. And then you can see also that for each group, you can define JavaScript code that's going to execute when the group is collapsed and when the group is expanded as well. So, and then of course the ability to programmatically show and hide groups is explained over here. So this are all the various options that you have for collapsing groups, collapsing all groups or collapsing individual groups, or collapsing only the groups that match a particular JavaScript function definition can be collapsed. So there's a lot of functionality in the ability to collapse and expand client-side groups. So next we'll talk about the advanced search control. So as I mentioned earlier, the advanced search control is available in both the list control and also in the grid components as well. And so let's open up this component here. So this UX has a list, and it also has an advanced search control. So let's go ahead and look at the list. So the list is just a standard list that's based on a SQL database. So it's this, in this particular case, it's based on the customers table. And let's run it and then talk about how this advanced list was advanced search was configured. So I'm going to go here and run it. So there's my list control over here, and there's my advanced search. So I'll go there and say I want to add a new search field. And what the advanced search does is lets the user at runtime pick which fields they want to search on. So in this case, the user can search on all of these fields. Now the developer is responsible for choosing which of these fields are exposed. So the developer might choose not to expose a certain field to a user. So I'll go ahead here and say country, and then you can see now I can go ahead now and type in the country, or I can configure this country field to be, say, an edit combo or an auto suggest. So in this case, I've got it configured as an edit combo. So that's going to make an AJAX callback now and get a list of all of the available countries. So I'll go ahead and say Canada, and then I'll go ahead now and add another search field. And this time I'll choose city. So now I'm searching on country and city, but I'd like to combine my criteria using an OR. And then I'll go to city and I'll choose, say, Barcelona. And then I'll go ahead now and run my query. And so there's my query results. I've turned on the debugging feature, so you can see I can actually see what query was generated from this data. I can also, because I've turned on this feature, I can go ahead now and save this query so that it can be used by another user at runtime without having to go ahead and define the query from scratch. So I'll go ahead and save it, and I'll just call this query 2. So I've previously saved a query called query 1. So I'll go ahead and save it, and you can see now I get my confirmation using one of the new drop-down message styles. So let's go and take a look now at how this advanced search feature is configured. So in order to add an advanced search, you just go here to Data Controls and go to More, and then you can choose Advanced Search List. So I'm going to go and add a second one over here. Then you bring up the builder and you specify which list you want to basically perform the advanced search on. So keep in mind that your UX component could have many different lists, and you can define multiple advanced search controls that where for each advanced search control you specify which particular list you want to be doing your searches on. Then you can go and add fields one by one, or just go simply add all the fields. So I'll just go here, add all the fields. And now in order to make country, say, into an edit combo, I'll change the control type from a text box, say, into a combo list, and then go ahead here and define the connection string, which I'll choose as Northwind, and then go ahead here and choose the table, which will be customers, and then the field, which would be country. So that's all that's needed in order to configure this country field to be an edit combo that gets populated with an AJAX callback to retrieve the list of available countries. So as I mentioned, the advanced search can also...
Can I interrupt just for a second? So if Kanban is in fact just an option of a list, and this is an advanced search for a list, will this work with Kanban?
That's correct. Basically, if the Kanban is based on a SQL database, which it can be, as I showed earlier, then since the Kanban is just a list, you could put a advanced search control on to search for data, and then the results of the search will be shown using the Kanban layout. And then, of course, you could switch from one layout type to another layout type. So you could switch from the Kanban layout to a free-form layout or a columnar layout.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
So one of the things that I mentioned is that when you're designing the advanced search control, you can choose the control type. So we showed how we can make country and city into edit combo controls, but there are also other control types. So let's go here and look at this list control, which is based on the Northwind's orders table. And the orders table has a date field, actually a date time field over here. And you can see we've got an advanced search control over there. And in this advanced search control, we've said that order date, the control type is a date range picker. So a date range picker is it's like a date picker, excepting that it has two calendar controls, one for the start date and also one for the end date. So let's go ahead now and run this. So we'll say, so here's our list control basically showing all of the data from the orders table. So now we'll go here and say we want to add a new search. We'll choose order date. And you can see now that when I basically click on the smart field here, we get our picker. And this is going to basically show two calendars, one calendar for the start date and one calendar for the end date. So I can see here that I've got some orders from 1994, say August of 94. So let's go here and choose August. And then we'll choose 1994. We'll choose August the 1st. And then we'll go here for our end date. And we'll choose, again, 1994. But this time we'll choose the 31st. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. So you can see now we basically, the advanced search control has filled in a date that uses QBF syntax. So this is the start date, dot, and then the end date. So we're using QBF syntax here. So we need to go here and tell the advanced search that we're going to be using QBF syntax. And so now I can go ahead now and run this query. And you can see now I get basically only the records that are in August 1994. So I can then go ahead and clear the search. And when I do a date search, I can also use this special control over here that has built into it a whole bunch of predefined date ranges. So for example, I can go here and say this year to date, and now when I go ahead and run the query, basically there's my result. So the advanced search is very powerful when it comes to date fields. And then let's go now over to a grid control. So I think this one here has an advanced search. So let's go ahead and run this. So yeah, there's my grid control. There's my advanced search. And if I go here and say search on order date, and then let's go here and pick this year to date, and then go ahead and run that query. So basically, the ability to use the advanced search in the grid is also very powerful. And every feature that you saw in the UX advanced search is available in the grid. So normally in a grid, the way you would add a search part is you'd go over here and you'd say basically that this grid has a search part. But now you can see that there's a little tip that's been added here that says maybe you want to use advanced search instead. And to do an advanced search, you just go here, you right click and say find ADV advanced search. Go ahead there, turn it on, and then bring up the Genie to configure it. When you're configuring the Genie, you can also specify over here whether basically the user is going to be allowed to load and save predefined searches, and also whether you want to display debugging information. So the debugging information shows you the actual SQL where clause that is generated from the data that the user types in. So that's the advanced search control. Let's move on now to the navigation control. So basically, grid controls have always had a nice, easy way to navigate from page to page. So let's go now and take a look at a list control that has been configured with a navigation control. So let's go ahead and run this list. So we can see here's our list control, and here in the bottom is our navigation control. So we can go next page, or we could basically tap on these buttons to go to a particular page. We can also go here and set the number of rows per page. So if we go here and say set 20, so now we're looking at 20 rows per page, and the number of pages basically changes. So the way in which we set up this navigation control is we go into the list, and you can see that the list basically we've got pagination turned on. So in order to do a navigation, you have to have pagination turned on. The list also has to be based on either a SQL data source or a transform data source. And we've also basically set our pagination method to navigation buttons as opposed to basically the other options, which are fetch more, auto fetch more, and navigation buttons. And then we basically said, yes, we do have a navigation bar. We've gone ahead here and we've configured all of the aspects of our navigation bar. We specified how many buttons appear on the left and the right of the current page button. So I'm going to go there and change that to say 2. And then I'm going to say that the current page should be shown as an input control rather than a button. And I've also got show page size selector turned on. And I've specified that my navigation bar should be in the footer, but I can go there and change that into the header. And let's go ahead now. And also let's go and change our button size from normal to compact. So go ahead now and run this. So we should see our navigation bar at the top as we do. And here's our navigation bar. And you can see also we can just go and type in page 7 and press enter. And that'll take us directly over to page 7 of the grid. So what we're trying to do with the list control is make it so that the list control becomes a reasonable replacement for every place where you use the grid. So the grid still has a lot of advantages over a list control, but those advantages are diminishing, and there are many features that the list has that grids don't have. So we're basically trying to continue to enhance the list control so that it becomes really a real viable option for all cases where you would previously have chosen to use a grid component. So moving on now, let's go ahead now and talk about...
Can I ask you just 2 quick questions?
Yeah.
The first is, do the list features also work? You're showing them in a desktop web scenario, but do they also work in mobile? For example,
Yes.
advanced search, they do?
Everything that I'm showing right now works in mobile.
That's
so there's
great.
Nothing that I've shown in the list so far. All of the features, advanced search, etc., client-side breaks, responsive columns, Kanban, everything is all available in mobile applications.
Excellent. The second question had to do with the saving of queries. When you save a query, is it for the current user or is it for everyone who uses the system? Is it saved for the group?
Currently, it's for everyone who uses the system.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we don't have, we could add it, but we don't currently have the ability for a user to save private queries. The queries themselves get saved in the repository table. So you could go to project properties, and you can see here that there's a table called repository settings. And this is a SQL table that you create in your own database, which is where all of the saved queries get stored.
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks.
Okay. So we're just going to quickly talk about client-side styling. So this is new. We've always had server-side styling, but now you can see that for example, this field over here, this contact name field, what we've done is we've said that the contact name, if the country is USA or the country is UK, that we want the color to be blue. So let's go ahead now and run this, and we'll see that basically for the rows where the country is UK or USA, that the contact name is blue. So there's UK over there, and as we scroll down to USA, it's blue. So client-side styling can either be done at the individual field level, or it can also be done at the cell level. So basically each field in a list control, a columnar list control, is inside a cell, like a spreadsheet, and you can apply the styling either to the field itself or to the cell. So those are options that you have there. So I think at this point, let's move on now from the list control enhancements, and let's take a look now at the style enhancements. So as I mentioned previously, the alpha style has been enhanced. It now has a lot of new sub-theme types, and it also has a pulse effect. So let's go now and look at styling. So I think I have a sample that I've built here, new styles over here. So you can see here that we're using the alpha style, but we've got this pulse effect turned on. So we've also got here in this component, I've added a whole bunch of different buttons, And for each of these buttons, I've specified a different sub-theme. So you can see this is the base sub-theme, which is the default. And then here we have basically a sub-theme called raised, and then one called subtle, etc. So let's go take a look now at how this looks. So here are all my different button styles. And as I mentioned, we've turned the pulse effect on. So when I tap on these buttons here, you can see a little pulse taking place. And this is basically something that was inspired by Google's material design. The pulse effect also applies to the list control. So you can see when I tap on a row here, I get that pulse effect. But also, in addition to adding new features to the alpha style, we've also basically added a whole bunch of new styles. So you can see all of these new styles here, starting here with alpha amber, alpha aqua, etc. And these styles are inherited. That means that they're inherited from alpha. So if we go and add a new feature to the alpha style, then all of these styles that are inherited from alpha will automatically get those styles. So if I go ahead now and choose, say, alpha dark, and then go and run this component, I'll see all of my button styles are still here, but now we're using a dark style. So there's the button with the pulse effect, subtle, raised, and then a circular button over there. So the new styles that are available, I think, will help you create components that just look really good. Then we've added a whole bunch of new message types. So let's go and take a look at those, and we'll talk about how we did them. So I'm going to open up this sample component here, and I'm going to run it, and then we'll go ahead and actually discuss it. So the first type is a drop-down message. So this is just a standard message, excuse me, that gives the user some information. And you can see right now that we're dropping down from the top, but you can just as easily drop down. You can just drop down from the bottom, which I guess would make it a drop up, not a drop down. And you can specify whether it's just a simple message or if it's a confirmation message, in which case it's going to have an OK and cancel button. And then you can add event handlers to the buttons. In this case, I've got you clicked OK. Then we have a wait message, which you can display during AJAX callbacks, for example. So in this case, I've got my wait message configured to go away after 2 seconds. So there's my wait message, and then after 2 seconds, it's going to go away. Transient messages, as I mentioned, are used a lot by Google in, say, the Gmail application. And a transient message is a message that is going to go away automatically by itself. So you can use it to basically say things like record was saved, etc. But you can also dismiss it prematurely. So you can see that I don't have to wait for the 2 seconds to be up before the message goes away. And then finally, we have action sheets. And action sheets are, again, a very common pattern that you see in a lot of mobile apps, especially iOS apps. They let you create these menus and assign actions to each one of the buttons. So let's go take a look now at how we did all of this. So there's the first one. It's just a action JavaScript drop-down message, and we've got our message style as being just a plain message as opposed to a confirmation or a wait. And then we basically specified that it drops down from the top, that it's 80% of the width of the screen, and there's our actual sample text, and then there's the optional JavaScript that we want to put into the OK button. The next one was a confirm message. So you can see we've changed our type here from message to confirm, and then we've defined some JavaScript for the OK button. Then the next one was our wait message. So you can see here we've actually got 2 actions. The first action opens up the wait message, and we can specify the animation style. It can either be 1 or 2, which is a different style of spinner. And then what we've done is we've said some inline JavaScript, and we've said that after 2 seconds, we're using the set timeout here. After 2 seconds, we want to go ahead and hide the message. And then here we have our transient messages, again, just using action JavaScript. So you can see there's a message box transient, which we selected from over there. And then the transient messages themselves can be configured. They can be positioned in one of several different positions, like top fill, top left, top right, etc. So I'm going to just go there and say top fill. You can specify the height and the width. You can also specify an appearance. So the appearance options are Google and default or custom. So Google basically uses the same style that Google has chosen, which is a black background. If you choose custom, you've got complete control over the appearance of the transient message. And if you choose style, basically inherits from the current theme that you're using. So those are all the options for the transient message. And then finally, we have action sheet over here. And again, this is done through Action JavaScript. There's an action sheet over there. And the configuration of the action sheet is done with a JSON object that divides the action sheet into different sections. So that's section 1, section 2, and section 3. And then each item in the section has some HTML text. And if it doesn't have an associated action, then it's just a label. And if it does have an action, then here's the JavaScript that's going to get executed when I click on save over there. So action sheets make it very easy to create a polished look in your UX components and also your grid components. Dropdowns and transients are available in the grid as well. Action sheets are not. But they let you very quickly create some very polished user interfaces for your applications. So let's move on now and take a look at the Ad-hoc SQL query builder. So I'm going to go ahead now and cancel out of this and go now to the Ad-hoc SQL query builder.
So
yeah, we have the Ad-hoc.
Quick question about the last topic. Is it possible to change those OK cancel buttons to something like yes or no? Do you have control over the text for those?
I don't think you currently do, but we could certainly add that. Okay. I'll write that down and make sure we do that for the next. Button labels. I'll just add, we'll add that for the next release.
Cool.
So basically, here's the Ad-hoc SQL query builder. So the way that this is created is when you say create a new component, you've got your list of templates here. If you just type in HOC, you'll see there's the template over there. And as I mentioned, it's just a sample UX component, so you're free to make any changes that you want to the behavior of this component. But in order to configure it, you go to this drop-down, which is connection string, and you specify the names of the connection strings that you want the user to be able to select. So you could make multiple connection strings available to a particular to the users of your application. And when we run this component, you'll see that the first thing that the user must do is choose which connection string they're going to be using. So I'll go here and choose Northwind, and then I'm going to say I'd like to be doing searches in the customer table. I'd like my results to have the customer ID field, company name, and say city. Then I can go and specify a filter if I want. I can say that I want basically only records where country is equal to USA. And I can add more if I want. I can specify a sort. And then I can go ahead and actually execute the query. And so there's my query result. I could, if I wanted, press this button to export the data to Excel. I could save this query so that it can be reused. And I can also show what SQL was generated for this query. So being able to add this type of functionality in your applications by just choosing this component is very powerful. A lot of our developers have asked for the ability to expose a custom query facility to their users in their applications. So next, I'd like to quickly talk about some of the other features that are in. So we mentioned that we've got a custom AlphaDAO drivers, which allow you to build drivers that connect to any data source. And one of the predefined driver options that we have is something called a multi-tenant driver. So when you are building multi-tenant applications, you have the choice of basically having all of your tenants either have their own database, or you can basically use a shared database. So in a multi-tenant application that is expected to have many hundreds or thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of users, it's really only practical to use a single database that is shared by all the tenants. In that case, you need to add a tenant ID field into the table, and you need to make sure that basically all of the queries that you do, all of the inserts, all of the updates, etc., are only done to the records that match the current tenant ID. So the way in which you can create a multi-tenant driver is you go over here, let's go over to SQL there, and we'll bring up the connection string builder. And I'm going to go ahead here and quickly just say new. I'll just call it multi-2. Bring up the builder here. And you can see that these are the list of available connection types that you can create. And so one of the options here is a multi-tenant driver. So I'll go ahead and choose that. And then I can basically specify what the connection string is to the real database. So, in this case, maybe Northwinds. What the field is in each table that contains the tenant ID, what the session variable is that contains the tenant ID. So typically in a multi-tenant application, in the on-login event, you will set the session variable that contains the ID of the tenant and then the tenant ID field type. So I've already created a multi-tenant driver here called multi-tenant, and let's go ahead now and look at this in use. So I'm going to go now to my grid multi-tenant over here. And what we'll see is that I'm faking out specifying the tenant ID in the grid initialized event. So I'm setting the tenant ID to be 1 over here. And my grid uses this multi-tenant connection string. So now that when I go ahead and do a live preview here, I should only see records for tenant ID number 1. So you can see I'm only seeing records here for tenant ID number 1. But if I go here and change my tenant ID from tenant ID 1 to tenant ID 2, then even though I haven't specified in the query anywhere that we're only looking at tenant ID number 2, we'll see that basically I'm only going to see records for tenant number 2. And if I were to go here and say maybe add a new record, I'll go here and type in say B222. I'll leave the tenant ID field blank, and I'll just type in something and then hit the submit. We can see that the tenant ID got filled in automatically. So this driver, this multi-tenant driver, does all of that for me automatically, and it makes it very easy to build multi-tenant applications. I can see that basically I've overstayed my welcome here, and we're close to the hour mark.
Say that. But we do have a ton of questions, and I know that we definitely will not get to them all. But if people could save their questions and send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com, we will be happy to get back to you and probably even show you in the upcoming demo and Q&A webcasts, maybe not necessarily with Selwyn, what the answers are to those questions. But anyway, you have another.
Dave, so just quickly, the things that I did not get to cover, and I'm not going to have time to, is how you can basically create an audit trail driver, how you can completely customize a driver and hook it up to any data source that you want. So if you've got a SOAP service and you want to basically make that look like an Alpha Anywhere a data source, so that you can use that in a grid or a list, that's possible. I didn't show how you create REST API proxies, and then also basically how the security framework now allows you to create this extended information table. So sorry that we couldn't get to all of that, but hopefully what we did cover was helpful.
Great.
Thanks,
Hey,
Dave.
Selwyn, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Thanks, everyone who attended. There were a ton of you this week. Glad to see that. And thank you very much for those who asked questions. If you have future questions, go ahead, send them to guides@alphasoftware.com. Also, this session will be recorded. If you're looking for that list, send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com, and I'm happy to forward you off the playlist of the Q&A webcasts. Thanks again. Hope to see you next week. Take care and goodbye.